Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, Part 5, Toronto, Chapters 31 through 35. Chapter 31, Interview of Kirsten Raymond by Francois Diallo, librarian of the New Petoskey Library and publisher of the New Petoskey News, Year 15, continued. Diallo: Forgive me, I shouldn't have asked about the knife tattoos. Raymond: Forgiven. Diallo: Thank you. I wondered, though, if I might ask you about the collapse. Raymond: Sure. Diallo: You were in Toronto, I think. Were you with your parents? Raymond: No. That last night, day one in Toronto, or I guess it's night one, isn't it? Whatever you want to call it, I was in a production of King Lear, and the lead actor died on stage. His name was Arthur Leander. You remember we talked about this a few years ago, and you had his obituary in one of your newspapers. Diallo: But perhaps you wouldn't mind, for the benefit of our newspaper's readers. Raymond: Okay, yes. He had a heart attack on stage, like I was saying. I don't remember many details about him because I don't remember very much of anything from that time, but I've retained a sort of impression of him, if that makes sense. I know he was kind to me and that we had some sort of friendship, and I remember very clearly the night when he died. I was on stage with two other girls in the production, and I was behind Arthur, so I didn't see his face, but I remember that there was some commotion just in front of the stage, and then I remember hearing a sound, this sharp thwack, and that was Arthur hitting his hand on the plywood pillar by my head. He'd sort of stumbled back, his arm flailed out, and then a man from the audience had climbed up on the stage and was running towards him. Diallo: The mystery audience member who knew CPR. He's in the New York Times obituary. Raymond: He was kind to me. Do you know his name? Diallo: I'm not sure anyone does. Chapter 32. On day 47, Jeevan woke. Jeevan saw smoke rising in the distance. He didn't know the fire would get very far, given all the snow, but he thought the fires in a city without firefighters hadn't occurred to him. Jeevan sometimes heard gunshots at night. Neither rolled-up towels, nor plastic, nor duct tape could keep the stench from the hallway from seeping in, so they kept the windows open at all times and wore layers of clothes. They slept close together on Frank's bed for warmth. Eventually, we're going to have to leave, Jeevan said. Frank put his pen down and looked past Jeevan at the window at the lake and the cold blue sky. I don't know where I'd go, he said. I don't know how I'd do it. Jeevan stretched out on the sofa and closed his eyes. Decisions would have to be made soon. There was enough food for only another 2 weeks. When Jeevan looked out at the expressway, he thought that the thought that plagued him was that maneuvering Frank's wheelchair through the crush of stopped cars would be impossible. They'd have to take alternate roads, and what if all the roads were like this? They hadn't heard anyone in the corridor for over a week, so that night Jeevan decided to risk venturing out of the apartment. He pushed the dresser away from the door and took the stairs to the roof. After all these weeks indoors, he felt exposed in the cold air. Moonlight glinted on glass, but there was no other light. A stark and unexpected beauty, silent metropolis, no movement. Out over the lake the stars were vanishing, blinking out one by one behind a bank of cloud. He smelled snow in the air. They would leave, he decided, and use the storm as cover. But what could be out there, Frank said. I'm not an idiot, Jeevan. I hear the gunshots. I saw the news reports before the stations went dark. I don't know. A town somewhere? A farm? A farm? Are you a farmer? Even if we weren't in the middle of winter, Jeevan, do farms even work without electricity and irrigation systems? What do you think will grow in the spring? What will you eat there in the meantime? I don't know, Frank. Do you know how to hunt? Of course not. I've never fired a gun. Can you fish? Stop it, Jeevan said. After I was shot, when they told me I wouldn't walk again, and I was lying in the hospital, I spent a lot of time thinking about civilization, what it means, and what I value in it. I remember thinking that I never wanted to see a war again as long as I live. I still don't. There's still a world out there, Jeevan said, outside the apartment. Excuse me. I think there's just survival out there, Jeevan. I think you should go out there and try to survive. I can't just leave you. I'll leave first, Frank said. I've given this some thought. What do you mean? He asked, but he knew what Frank meant. Chapter 33. Raymond. Do you still have that obituary of Arthur Leander? I remember you showed it to me years ago, but I don't remember if it had the name Diallo. Do I still have the second to last edition of the New York Times? What a question. Of course I do. But no, it doesn't have the name. That man from the audience who performed CPR on Leander, he's unidentified. Under normal circumstances, there would have been a follow-up story, presumably. Someone would have found him, tracked him down. But tell me what happened. Mr. Leander fell, and then Raymond. Yes, he collapsed, and then a man came running across the stage, and I realized he'd come from the audience. He was trying to save Arthur. He was performing CPR. And then the medics arrived, and the man from the audience sat with me while they did their work. I remember the curtain fell, and I was sitting there on stage watching the medics, and the man from the audience spoke with me. He was so calm. That's what I remember about him. We went and sat in the wings for a while until my minder found us. She was a babysitter, I guess. It was her job to look after me and the other two children in the show. Do you remember her name? No, I remember she was crying, really sobbing, and it made me cry too. She cleaned my makeup off, and then she gave me a present, that glass paperweight I showed you once. You're still the only person I know who carries a paperweight in her backpack. It's not that heavy. Diallo, it seems an unusual gift for a child. Raymond, I know, I thought it was beautiful. I still think it's beautiful. Diallo, that's why you took it with you when you left Toronto? Raymond, yes, anyway, she gave it to me, and I guess eventually we quieted down. I remember after that we stayed in the dressing room playing cards, and then she kept calling my parents, but they never came. Diallo, did they call her back? Raymond, she couldn't reach them. I should say I don't really remember this next part, but my brother told me. Eventually she called Peter, my brother, who was at home that night. He said he didn't know where they were either, but said she could bring me home and he'd look after me. Peter was much older than me, 15 or 16 at the time, so he looked after me a lot. The woman drove me home and left me there with him. Diallo, and your parents? Raymond, I never saw them again. I have friends with similar stories. People just vanished. Diallo, they were among the very first then, if this was day one in Toronto. Raymond, yes, they must have been. I wonder sometimes what happened to them. I think perhaps they got sick in their offices and went to the ER. That seems to me the most likely scenario. And then once they got there, well, I can't imagine how anyone could have survived in any of the hospitals. Diallo, so you stayed home with your brother and waited for them to come back. Raymond, we didn't know what was happening. For the first little while, waiting seemed to make sense. Chapter 34. Read me something, Jeevan said, on the 58th day. He was lying on the sofa staring up at the ceiling, and he'd been drifting in and out of sleep. It was the first thing he'd said in 2 days. Frank cleared his throat. Anything in particular? He hadn't spoken in 2 days either. The page you're working on now. Really? You want some overprivileged philanthropist thoughts on the charity work of Hollywood actors? Why not? Frank cleared his throat. The immortal words of a philanthropist whose name I'm not allowed to divulge, but who you've never heard of anyway, he said. What I like to see is when actors use their celebrity in an interesting way. Some of them have charitable foundations. They do things like try to bring attention to the plight of women and girls in Afghanistan, or they're trying to save the white African rhino, or they discover a passion for adult literacy, or what have you. All worthy causes, of course, and I know their fame helps to get the word out. But let's be honest here. None of them went into the entertainment industry because they wanted to do good for the world. Speaking for myself, I didn't even think about charity until I was already successful. Before they were famous, my actor friends were just going to auditions and struggling to be noticed, taking any work they could find, acting for free in friends' movies, working in restaurants or as caterers, just trying to get by. They acted because they loved acting, but also, let's be honest here, to be noticed. All they wanted was to be seen. I've been thinking lately about immortality, what it means to be remembered, what I want to be remembered for, certain questions concerning memory and fame. I love watching old movies. I watch the faces of long-dead actors on the screen, and I think about how they'll never truly die. I know that's a cliche, but it happens to be true. Not just for the famous ones who everyone knows, the Clark Gableses, the Ava Gardners, but the bit players, the maid carrying the tray, the butler, the cowboys in the bar, the third girl from the left in the nightclub. They're all immortal to me. First, we only want to be seen, but once we've been seen, that's not enough anymore. After that, we want to be remembered. Chapter 35. Diallo, what was it like those last days before you left Toronto? Ramon, I stayed in the basement watching television. The neighborhood was emptying out. Peter was going out at night, stealing food, I think. And then one morning he said, Kiki, we've got to go. He hotwired a car that the neighbors had abandoned, and we drove for a while, but we got trapped. All the ramps onto the expressway were clogged with abandoned cars, the side roads too. Finally, we just had to walk like everyone else. Diallo, where did you go? Ramon, east and south, around the lake, down into the United States. The border was open by then. All the guards had left. Diallo, did you have a set destination? Ramon, I don't think so. No, but it was either leave or wait in Toronto, and what we've been waiting for.